This is from Betwixt and Between Patterns of Masculine and Feminine Initiation, edited by Louise Maudie, Stephen Foster, and Meredith Little. We're not going to read this whole book from start to finish. These are just selected works. The Decline of Masculine Rites of Passage in Our Culture, The Impact on Masculine Individuation, by Jerome S. Berenstein. In this article, The Decline of Masculine Rites of Passage in Our Culture, Jerome Berenstein explores the depths and dimensions of the predicament in which many modern males find themselves. It is not, as many men seem to feel, so much that man is losing his power to women. Rather, it is that women are taking back power which previously they have used to support and carry the male's feeling side for him. As a result, the contemporary male increasingly experiences uncertainty, depression, dependency, loneliness, despair, feelings which have been there all along. He examines the reasons for the decline and considers means by which men might rectify imbalances within themselves caused by the absence of meaningful male rites of initiation. Contrasts his treatment of the devouring mother archetype with that of Marion Woodman in her essay on the emergence of the feminine. Note also his development of the concept of the male participation mystique. Whether or not the reader agrees with the author on every point, she will nevertheless be conducted on a provocative and sometimes controversial view of the psyche of the modern male. Jerome S. Berenstein, M.A., a clinical psychologist and Jungian analyst practicing in Washington, D.C., received his training at George Washington University and the C.G. Jung Institute of New York, where he presently serves as vice chairman of the board. He has lectured on the archetypal dynamics of the nuclear threat and is currently working on a book concerning archetypal and clinical dynamics of masculine individuation, and another on the return of the magical level of consciousness. The evolution of civilization and modern technology has brought about the progressive weakening of masculine rites of passage and initiation in our culture. Most of the rites which used to carry archetypal value in supporting positive masculine ego development have atrophied or vanished altogether, as Sol Kimball puts it in his introduction to the English edition of Van Gennep's classic, The Rites of Passage. The continued expansion of an industrial urban civilization has produced extensive changes in our social system. Prominent among these have been increased secularization and the decline in the importance of sacred ceremonialism. There is no evidence that a secularized urban world has lessened the need for ritualized expression of an individual's transition from one status to another. Obviously, ceremonialism alone cannot establish the new equilibrium, and perfunctory ceremony may be pleasant but also meaningless. It is clear that industrial urban civilization has been changing even more rapidly since the first publication of this important book in 1909, thus accelerating the decline of essential rites of passage in Western civilization. Over the years, and particularly since the advent of the 20th century, what was and remains a function of the masculine archetype, i.e., rational science, has become identified with man's ego, intellect, and the power principle. This identification has led to a strong ego inflation and an over-identification with the intellect, to the impoverishment of the spirit and soul, and an over-dependence on science as omniscient. Modern man's rationalism led us to dismiss the psychic dimension. As a result, men are at the mercy of the psychic underworld, of which they are largely unconscious. With regard to rites of passage, this inflation of the intellect has led to excessive secondary personalization of transpersonal material, i.e., the reduction of transpersonal contents to personal factors. The result has been to further weaken those rituals and rites of passage extant in modern culture, with a drastic depotentiation of the power of the archetype of initiation. Prior to World War II, for many young men in this country, the high school diploma constituted a major confirmation of passage into manhood. Completion of high school often meant leaving the parental home, becoming self-supporting, and getting married. But since the end of the Second World War, the value of a high school diploma has rapidly and consistently declined due to increased technology, rendering high school graduation almost useless as a sure ticket to self-supporting employment. Without the earning capacity the high school diploma used to confer, the male graduate's ability to leave home and live self-sufficiently has been curtailed. The need for higher education in order to compete in the labor market has made many young men more dependent on their parents for financial support. Sometimes it becomes impossible for them to sever from their childhood home while they are still being educated. Similarly, in times past, the bar mitzvah used to represent a true rite of passage for Jewish males. With his bar mitzvah, the young man would undergo a dramatic separation from the overt domination of his mother and would take his place in the community of men. Having been given the full rights and respect conferred on male adults in the Jewish community, having become a bar mitzvah, he would participate with the men in the study of the law and traditions and would partake of masculine activities and rites from which women were assiduously excluded. Today, the bar mitzvah all too often represents a celebration for the parents who mark their achievement in raising a fine young man. The boy performs the rites of the modern bar mitzvah in the name of his parents and has little knowledge of the meaning of the rite as a celebration of his own passage. The type of bar mitzvah has almost no transformative power. It is worth noting, however, that there appears to be an upsurge in the number of Jewish families choosing to follow the more orthodox religious practices, including the traditional bar mitzvah. This may be in part a compensatory response to the decline of ritual in American Jewish culture. Profound isolation, fear, and the threat of death have been a part of masculine initiation rites for thousands of years. The army, until the 1950s, represented another major source of masculine initiation. In the army, the young man would encounter all of the awesomeness of masculine initiation, including confrontation with death itself. In recent times, however, the character of warfare has radically changed. Since Vietnam, it appears that war will be waged more by machines than man. Recruits for the modern armed forces are sought more for the purposes of maintaining and servicing automated instruments of warfare than for the purposes of man-to-man combat. In the age of the volunteer army, the awesomeness and fear formerly inspired in youth by the armed forces, the bastion of masculine power and rule, has degenerated considerably, and with it the army's power to effect the transformation from boyhood to manhood. The military draft, a kind of violent wrenching away of the boy from his childhood home and the dominance of his mother, is gone. Also lost is much of the sense of mysterious awe that the father archetype, as represented by military authorities, held for the new recruit. Whereas before he might have been unavoidably drafted, now he is given the choice and is allowed to make that choice on the basis of his own assessment of the degree to which the army meets his needs. Although the armed forces remain probably the single most potent institutional source of legitimate masculine initiation in our culture, there is a growing decline in its power to bring about a complete separation from the archetype of the mother. For many men, it represents as secure a hiding place as they can find from the power of the feminine, rather than a place where a man learns the heroic art. Even here, where the feminine heretofore was contained rigidly in the model of the officer's wife who centered her life around the manly activities of her husband, women have now infiltrated the military academics themselves. Some even participate in combat training jointly with the men and exercise command authority by rank over them. This kind of archetypal contamination represents yet another sign of the inability of the military to provide an effective initiatory experience for the modern male. The decline of rites of passage in American culture has been universal and rapid. What has been observed about the role of the high school diploma, the bar mitzvah, and the armed services might also be said of numerous other masculine rites of passage, such as college education, competitive athletics, the driver's license, the first job, the bachelor party, the marriage ceremony, the first shave, moving into one's own home, the initiation into the union or guild, and even the first night drunk with the boys. The male group. Most of the development of the young male's heroic identity takes place during the transition from adolescence to young adulthood. It is particularly of this transition stage that the archetype of initiation breaks down in American culture. Since primitive times, in order to permit the emergence and development of the individual ego and differentiation of the individual self, group ritual and ceremony has degenerated and been supplanted by rituals of the individual. Over the centuries, a split probably occurred between the priest-mediators and those on whose behalf the priest-mediators functioned. The latter progressively ceased to be direct participants in the rites and increasingly became observer of the rites. This resulted in a corresponding loss of participation mystique on the part of the observers and led to the loss of a direct, living relationship with the archetype of initiation. Over time, the loss of group identification with archetypal energy has left the individual fascinated with and gripped by the symbols of the archetype, but ignorant of their meaning and value and often untransformed by them. Outer acts derived from ritual in man's past are now all too often replaced by inner symbols and rites within the individual psyche, e.g., dreams, obsessive behavior, etc. However, the crucial factor in bringing about a true psychological transformation through inner ritual is the individual's consciousness of the process itself. Without some level of ego participation, either through enactment and or self-reflection, ritual becomes ritualism. And herein lies the dilemma. Since consciousness tends to be biased against the intrusion of unconscious contents, especially the sort that characteristically emerge through ritual behavior. With regard to the archetype of initiation, then, the ego is biased against those very practices which would further its own development and evolution. In a society like ours, which places enormous value on the individual, the value and status of the group self has progressively declined over the years. At the same time, historically speaking, the group has played a crucial role in masculine individuation and has been the single most powerful source of rites of passage in the psyche of man. Henderson postulates 3 conditions necessary for male individuation. 1. Separation from the original family or clan. 2. Commitment to a meaningful group over a long period of time. And 3. Liberation from too close an identity with the group. In primitive times, the group was a powerful entity, and males emerging from matriarchal dominance identified themselves with a clearly defined male group to which they owed total allegiance, often for many years. The separation of the sexes in many primitive cultures was usually total. Often, the severe taboos and sanctions against the intermingling of the sexes in other than a tightly prescribed manner. Andrew, a 24-year-old youth, the middle of 3 sons, sought my analytic help. He was a middle-level staff member in a federal government agency. His complaint was that he was experiencing a high degree of anxiety about being an outsider. He felt like he had missed his social and sexual life as a teenager by trying to play out an idealized, mature, masculine role based on intellectual ideas prescribed by his parents. He complained of intense jealousy of contemporaries who led a more mature life than he, and of obsessive thoughts about whether or not his lovers had more sexual encounters. He admitted to feeling inadequate and humiliated as a male, which sometimes resulted in situational impotence. He had obsessive fears of impotency. He feared that his penis was abnormally small. Sometimes it shriveled when he was very anxious. He had a violent temper with active fantasies of violence, mostly towards men whom he felt threatened by or who might humiliate him. Often, he felt the need to challenge authority figures, male and female. He had invested an enormous amount of energy into containing his anger. This sometimes left him feeling psychically and physically debilitated. Andrew's parents separated and divorced when he was 19. He remained with his mother but was away at college for the year. He described his mother as a pure, idealistic, intellectual, castrating bitch, noting that he resembled her most emotionally. He described his father as a man who wanted to appear as big and macho, but who in effect was weak and pathetic. Andrew expressed both pity and rage at this father and had little respect for him. In our initial session, Andrew stated, "I've got to get over being a teenager. I've got to hurry up and be a teenager. Gotta live through it. I guess I need some kind of rite of passage." It was my view that Andrew was stuck at the adolescent stage of ego development. Instead of being initiated into his manhood by his father, Andrew had been abandoned by him. After working with him for a few months, it became apparent to me that Andrew had never really physically or psychically left his mother's home, and that although he perceived himself as being financially independent and self-supporting, he had no home of his own. At the time he entered analysis, he had half of his clothes and other possessions at his current girlfriend's apartment, and the other half at his mother's house, his childhood home. He would sleep at his girlfriend's several nights during the week and would spend a night or two at his mother's, particularly if the relationship with his girlfriend became difficult, which it did with some regularity. He used his mother's address as his legal address. Andrew had divided his time like this since completing undergraduate school. He would always have a girlfriend with whom he would be kind of living, but without any formalization of the relationship, and had no stated commitment to it. He counted on his other home at his mother's house as a backup when things got rough with his girlfriend or when he was experiencing other insecurities. It was clear that he had never psychically severed from his mother. Indeed, by his acknowledgement, he tended to treat his girlfriends as he had idealized his mother should be treated when he was younger. A man's capacity to be related to a woman is, in part, a function of his capacity to live alone, to bring his own inner mother, his own capacity to an internal home. To the extent that he cannot, he remains dependent in a maternal sense upon a woman. Without the ability to live alone, he remains mother-bound and will project the maternal into his relationships with women. I suggested to Andrew that it was important for him to separate completely from his mother and to claim his own life space. I also suggested that since he was not prepared to commit himself to an exclusive relationship with his current girlfriend, he might consider admitting it to her rather than behaving as if he was both independent and exclusively committed to her. I suggested getting his own apartment, something he had never had in his life, would constitute an important rite of passage and would help to separate him from his mother-bound state. After a few sessions around this issue, he did find and move into his own apartment. Exactly 4 weeks to the day that he moved into his own apartment, he had the following dream. I was in a house or apartment. It may have been my brother's or my house or both. It seemed like it wasn't mine. Anyway, I felt ill at ease there. There were people there, a party, and I had only gym shorts on. I remember feeling very anxious and rushing around like I had chores before the party began. The people didn't feel like friends, but like strangers, or friends of friends, or people I had to be false with. I went outside. It was afternoon, Saturday or Sunday. There was a big playing field, like the back of the house opened onto a college campus. There were people milling around the field, mostly young boys dressed to play soccer or some other sport. I still felt threatened. They seemed to be linked with those in the party. Cool, cruel, mocking, frightening. I felt like I was so insecure I had to be their target. They had lots of balls. They began pitching them to me from all directions. First came a little rubber ball like we used to have at school. I had to do something with the balls, but something was on my mind for whatever reason. I felt like I was in a no-win situation. I had to return the balls and not bobble them. But these kids were threatening me with their leers, and I had something on my mind keeping me from playing. But I got into it. First came the small ball, and I was amazed that I kicked it accurately and low with my left foot. I kicked a couple of others with my left foot, again, surprisingly accurately. I thought, throw the balls back to them, then it will be accurate. They came rapidly and from all directions. In all, only 5 or 10. Finally came a white soccer ball. I put a little into this kick. The ball soared. A huge kick. Tremendously high and far. The power. Wham! When my foot met the ball, it was surpassed by the distance of the kick. I actually had not put everything into it, just something. But the kick was superior, grand, amazing, powerful, and supremely satisfying. The kids watched with awe, respect, and joy. They felt how powerful I was, but weren't afraid and were getting off on it. Then I remembered the joy of kicking balls, how I loved to distance them, how I loved to hit home runs, how I could play goalie in soccer and kick the ball to the other goal. Power, joy, exhilaration, expression. I wanted to kick more, just like I always used to want to kick more back then. The feeling of my power and joy had suddenly broken the hold of my insecurity. I was almost in a trance, a reverie. I wanted to be free and to demonstrate my power. I woke up. The dream reflects the culmination of a psychic progression from the dominance of the archetype of the mother to the archetype of the father, and finally to the archetype of the male group. It reflects Andrew's sight of separation from his mother and girlfriend by claiming his own life space. In the dream, he moves from the psychic realm of the mother and the father into the all-male group, an essential step in his journey toward masculine selfhood. The dream itself was a rite of passage. Andrew's dream initiation into this male group was attended by all of the anxieties involved in leaving a familiar realm for a new and unfamiliar one. But Andrew's initiation was more than successful. He triumphantly passed the rituals to which he was submitted and clearly connected with his masculine power. Indeed, he outplayed all the other males on the field in the group once he had lived through his fear and dread concerning separation from the mother and his insecurities about his capabilities to survive on his own and compete with other males. Andrew had not yet really begun his hero's journey, but with this dream entrance into an all-male group, where he could explore his own masculine power, he had taken his first psychic steps in that direction. In a psychological sense, the masculine mysteries are learned in the male group. With the assistance of powerful libido of the group, the individual male is helped to pull free from strong, regressive, Oedipal forces. The group serves as a kind of second parent and is a way station for the developing male from which he goes on forays in the fearsome world of adult power. Here in the group, he can relax, so to speak, while he builds up his strength and courage for the next and more difficult steps in his individuation journey, separation from the mother and father archetypes, the male group itself, and finally encounter with his individual self. Neumann states that the male group is the birthplace not only of consciousness and of the higher masculine, but of individuality and the hero. Some of the masculine mysteries performed in modern male groups involve such activities and behaviors as exclusion of women from membership in the group, collective rites where the feminine is literally or figuratively overpowered and conquered by the masculine, e.g. bachelor parties or porno movies, sharing with each as a group their individual sexual exploits with women, bragging about power confrontations and sexual conquests, elder-teacher, novice-apprentice relationships between older and younger members of the group, bodybuilding, phallic play as reflected in group showers, exploratory homosexual behavior, portrayal of masculine and heroic attributes in posters and art, esoteric language peculiar to the group athletic competition, and other kinds of positive or negative group gang behavior. All of these activities aim at protecting the fearful ego from the negative power of the feminine, depotentiating it while building masculine libido. These behaviors provide training programs for the development of masculine prowess, and importantly, establish a masculine ethos other than that of the father. The male group has steadily weakened in American culture, particularly since the early 1960s, with the advent of a stronger social emphasis on individuality, civil rights, and feminine individuation, and with the penetration of male groups by women and their disenchantment with the group's excessively patriarchal character. The male group has lost much of its cohesiveness. Many exclusively male fraternities have disappeared altogether, or nearly so. The male army, male athletic teams in some communities, private men's clubs, the men's barbershops, even the all-male YMCA, among others. Many of those male groups that do remain intact have lost their purpose. They no longer serve as secret societies where masculine mysteries are shared and learned. Many have degenerated into hiding places where men gather to socialize as they hide from the devouring mother, rather than to gear up for a final wrenching free of her. Some surviving forms of the male group include athletic teams, college fraternities, Lions clubs, and other more loosely formal clubs, such as can be found in health clubs and gyms, those that practice sexual segregation, men's poker clubs, and the like. It is worth noting, however, that male groups can affect all levels and strata of society. For example, the membership of the segregated, exclusively male Bohemian Club of San Francisco has included U.S. presidents, senators, and Supreme Court justices. The club became a focus point of controversy in the 1981 confirmation hearings of Attorney General William French Smith, who also has been a member. They were formal charges of sex discrimination by the state of California, allegations of homosexual behavior between guests and staffs, descriptions of bizarre rituals and ceremonies, and accounts of members dressed as women and portraying female roles performing in various dramas. In its defense, the club secretary stated that the intrusion of women into this atmosphere would destroy that special environment by their presence. Members complained that they would not be able to urinate in the open if women were admitted. On the other end of the spectrum, those men who use the male group primarily as a place to hide from women and who never consciously deal with their fear of them may find themselves stuck in the group. The 1960s film Marty depicts this dilemma well. Its chief figure, Marty, a man in his 30s, used the group to hide from his fear of women. As the story unfolded, it became clear that the prime factor which held the group together was its fear of women and its refusal to deal with them. As Marty moved towards a meaningful relationship with a woman, he encountered enormous resistance and ridicule from the group. His struggle to break away from this bond with the group in order to relate more freely to his woman resulted in a resumption of his individuation and his eventual departure from the group. However, not all such situations turn out as positively as with Marty. A negative example of male bonding to the group can be seen in some of the motorcycle gangs where the primary identity of the male is and remains with a group from which the female either is excluded or ruthlessly controlled by being treated as if she were group property or individual property. As Henderson points out, the main feature of those who successfully undertake the initiation journey is that they have exhausted the absolutism of their group identity temporarily, if they are young, more or less permanently, if they are older. Since passage through the male group is an integral part of the transition from the adolescent to the man-hero stage of ego development, the archetype of initiation still strives for incarnation, even though the male group has significantly atrophied. As a result, many young American males have regressed to a primitive form of participation mystique. With the decline of the male group and its associated ritual, the masculine psyche nonetheless seeks connection with the group self, and will sometimes project that need misguidedly onto groups, which will give it definition, support, and guidance on its quest for individuation. We can see this today in sects of cults, in the fanatical followers of Reverend Moon, Scientology, and in other such groups, which stand ready to use such youth for their own purposes. The awesome archetypal power of the group self, as expressed through participation mystique, can be seen readily in the absolute allegiance of members of these cults, no matter how repressive and regressive the group may become. We have witnessed the dramatic results of unconscious projection of this archetype in its most fanatical form with the mass suicides of the followers of Jim Jones in Jonestown, Guyana. In addition, the mass media, by appropriating the modern ritual medium of male use, e.g. rock and roll music, team sports, etc., have substituted themselves as oracles for the male group. Through advertising which project a static image of the healthy male in our society, the media have exerted a powerful influence on the determination of modern standards for the masculine group. Ads tell the adolescent and young adults in our society that he is a true hero if he drinks Coke or smokes Marlboro cigarettes, or if he treats girls as they were mindless maidens in distress. The message is that he need only identify by imitating their personal habits with the heroes of the mass media to become a hero. He doesn't have to do the work himself by performing his own heroic deeds or experiencing his own rites of passage. These ads systematically undermine the process of self-reflection, crucial to masculine ego development. In place of self-reflection is being cool, i.e., identification with artificial and distorted images of the heroic. Given the universal decline of the male group and of rites of passage in our culture, the contemporary male is left essentially with three alternatives. 1. to connect up consciously with those legitimate outer rites of passage which survive, or to create new ones. 2. To become aware of the inner rites of passage which take place symbolically within his own psyche, and to consciously enact them. Or 3. To pay the price for his unconsciousness and disconnectedness from the archetype of initiation with stunted ego development and the risk of falling into a regressive participation mystique. Recent developments in the archetype of the feminine and their impact on the male. Because the atrophy of masculine rites of passage in our culture has left modern men more susceptible to the regressive power of the Great Mother, a look at recent developments in the archetype of the feminine is necessary to assess the present state of the masculine ego in our time. Since the 1950s, the archetype of the feminine has emerged from what appeared to be a long and quiet sleep and has become probably the most dynamic archetypal energy prevalent in our midst today. Although the roots of the current freeing of feminine archetypal energy can be traced back to the suffrage movement after World War I, the women's movement has become a universal aspect of our culture only in the past 2 decades. It seems evident that a psychoevolutionary drama is taking place in our culture, as manifested by a resurgence of the feminine. The emergence of the feminine hero. In the past 2 decades, we have seen the woman emerge from the home and take her place as a competitive member of the labor force. Nowadays, women are represented in almost every occupation which heretofore was the exclusive domain of men. Not only have women entered a number of professions previously unavailable to them, but their mere presence has resulted in changes in the very nature of some jobs. This assertiveness on their part is not limited to the type of jobs they hold. Notwithstanding the defeat of the Equal Rights Amendment, women are winning legal and social victories concerning their right to live and function as more complete women in our society. Many women no longer see their primary role as being the kind of woman their husbands would have them be. They no longer have to choose between being a career woman or a mother. It has become increasingly possible for them to be both, each role representing true and legitimate expressions of their femininity. Women have come to respect their own intellects and to value their contribution to society. In so doing, they have demanded and won male respect for their skills and achievements. Women appear to be more consciously active in their individuation process than men are at this point in history. The long-time suppression of the feminine ego and the absence of avenues for outer expression gave rise to considerable frustration, resentment, anger, longing, and fantasy. Over time, the resulting tension has tended to stimulate positive animus growth, which in turn has fostered feminine assertiveness, in many instances spurring healthy ego development. The negative, defeminizing side of the woman's movement is a result of an over-identification with the animus, i.e., the inner masculine component of women. Rather than being inactive over the centuries, the archetype of the feminine has been incubating and gestating. Its incubation period seems to have ended around the beginning of the decade of the 60s, because women were forced to protect and nurture their egos through deep inner reflection and self-awareness, rather than in a more extroverted manner like men. They tended to focus on their state of being and became more physically active in their own growth and development. It appears that this introverted process has peaked in the past 15 years and, with considerable help from the animus, is becoming more outwardly manifested. Sleeping Beauty has finally awakened, if not leapt out of bed. As the feminine hero, the woman is one who breaks the bonds of her need for connectedness with a man when those bonds impede her self-realization. The woman is the one who perceives the uncertain path toward her own individuality, often at the cost of intense loneliness and pain. Increasingly, women seem to be forced to separate from emotionally stagnant and dependent attachments with men in order to pursue their lives. The persistently high divorce rate and frequent incidents of female head of household families seem to support this impression. The growing independence and assertiveness of women has put tremendous pressure on the male. This is evident in the labor market and increasingly so in the political arena. Most significantly, it has put psychological pressure on men to relate meaningfully with women. There can be little doubt that much of the encroachment of women into the masculine domain is resented by men. Women are claiming their femininity, not as reflected by men, but as they experience it in themselves. They are insisting that men relate to them as individual women. Women are rejecting the inclusive role of server to their husbands and are seeking true companionship in their relationships with husbands and lovers, both as companion to the man and as recipient of companionship from the man. Large numbers of women are now putting considerable sexual pressure on the male to satisfy his partner as well as himself. Women have assumed an equal status with their sexual partners. This new sexual pressure on the man often leads him to be primarily concerned with his performance at the expense of intimacy. In my practice, I have encountered a rash of complaints from both men and women regarding problems of impotency on the part of the man when intimacy and sex must be addressed in the same woman. It is as if many men cannot tolerate oppression of their eros and emotional vulnerability in the same relationship. Depersonalization of the woman, i.e. impersonal sex on the part of men, appears to be a way of avoiding the perceived to be threatening power of the feminine, a power which, in many men, evokes sexual impotency. Thus, many men who have not fully attained sexual maturity find themselves compulsively pursuing simultaneous relationships with women. One relationship where the man finds emotional security and support, often with a mother surrogate, and another type of relationship, primarily sexual, with one or more women. In the former, often with his wife, the man finds emotional security, which may or may not include intimacy, but is sexually insecure and sometimes impotent. In the latter, the man is sexually active and feels potent, but there is a noted insistence by the man on an absence of emotional commitment to the relationship. The primary response of many men to their fear of an emancipated woman appears to be a form of escapism involving repression, denial, and sublimation. Many men use work to avoid family life and involvement with their wives and lovers. Others escape into affairs with understanding women to whom they have no obligations or responsibilities, or they have multiple marriages. Others find haven in men's group and secret society where women are excluded. Homosexuality is another avenue of escape for men fearing intimacy with women. Psychotherapy can provide another means of avoidance for the man who wishes to turn his problems over to a father or mother surrogate who, he hopes, either will work it out for him or tell him that his ongoing pattern is really okay. Modern man often reacts to the feminine hero as if she were the devouring mother herself. Her assertion of independence and her claim of individuality is perceived as a threat by many men. This is understandable. Men have had nothing in their experience and training to prepare them for their social and psychic revolution, and experience their loss of power over women as an absolute loss of masculine power. On the other hand, women have been waiting for centuries for their emancipation and the resumption of their individuation as women. While women find new life meaning and an increasing sense of empowerment, men often experience a loss of power which for them is tantamount to a humiliating defeat for the masculine ego. They face a threatening future which has less and less clear definition for them in relation to women and their own masculinity. This largely unconscious fear of women is amply reinforced by some women who, when a man does permit himself to be emotionally vulnerable with her, often will attack and humiliate him for not being macho enough to fight her. In this regard, women must face their own reluctance to give up their need for macho men. For centuries, men have romanticized the plight of the woman in distress. They have nurtured the myth of the masculine hero as one who saves the woman from her plight. The net result has been the oppression of women and men's continuing alienation from their own feminine side, from their own feelings and soul. It is their own distressed feeling side, the anima, which they project unconsciously onto women and which they are continually trying to save. But with the emergence of the feminine hero, the self-assertive, individuating woman, the male is confronted with the fact that the woman is in less distress than his own anima. The feminine hero is no longer a convenient hook for masculine projections of feminine weakness and dependency. She is giving his distressed anima back to the man, and along with it, his insistence that women take care of him. Engaged with her own self-development, she is much less inclined to take responsibility for nurturing the male's anima for him. She is too busy with her own individuation to play the game of rescue with a man who would rather project his feminine side onto her than own it himself. It is not, as many men seem to feel, so much that the man is losing his power to women. Rather, it is that women are taking back power which previously they have used to support and carry the male's feeling side for him. As a result, the contemporary male increasingly experiences uncertainty, depression, dependency, loneliness, despair, feelings which have been there all along. Thus, it is not women in distress that is the primary issue in masculine development, but rather the condition of the man's inner feminine feeling side. Men can't save women. To the extent that women need to be saved, they will have to do that for themselves. Likewise, when women stop saving men, i.e., stop trying to hold men's heads above the water of their own insecurity and depression, men will have to directly address those issues in themselves. A willingness to engage the feminine hero enables a man to depend on the feminine, but the dependency does not mean that the woman carries the man's burden for him, nor does it mean castration or surrendering masculine power. Rather, it means learning to rely on a helper, by definition someone with a commitment to the man, to engage his feelings when necessary, by permitting his feelings and emotions to be engaged. The man is enabled to search within himself for the wherewithal to respond. Through this conscious search, he contacts his own inner feminine and explores the depths and strengths of his own psyche. It is also through this inner quest that he will encounter his inner Athena helper. Mythologically, as the goddess born of the masculine, she was birthed live from the swollen head of Zeus. Athena represents the feminine contained in the masculine. She represents a different and crucial dimension of the feminine from that which man typically encounters in women. The inner Athena embodies principles of moral and psychic courage essential to a full realization of masculine power. It is the realization of this inner Athena helper that will give the male the psychic resources which he has sought erroneously from women. The modern devouring mother. Concomitant with the emergence of the feminine hero, a powerful and destructive aspect of the mother archetype has been manifesting itself in the form of giant corporations and big government. The modern devouring mother appears in the guise of a benevolent, nurturing, protective mother, rekindling images in men of the most nurturing aspects of the maternal. But too often she is one which seeks to hold men to her breast with a stranglehold, opposing their masculine individuation at every turn in the name of fostering and protecting it. Neumann's description of the positive aspect of the Great Mother is helpful here. She is life and psyche in one. She gives nourishment and pleasure, protects and warms, comforts and forgives. She is the refuge for all suffering, the goal of all desire. For always, this mother is she who fulfills, the bestower and helper. This living image of the great and good mother has at all times of distress been the refuge of humanity and ever shall be, for the state of being contained in the whole, without responsibility or effort, is paradisical. For a child, this mother is essential and fosters his psychic and emotional well-being. Before the adult male striving to attain his herohood, she can be deadly and can hold him bound, aborting his hero journey. As Whitman puts it, there is no freedom possible except by virtue of losing the containedness in the mother and developing a consciousness that is separate. Today, giant corporations and big government have become the devouring mother for many men. Over 38.4% of males aged 16 and over work either for one of the Fortune 500 corporations or for the government. In our society, there is chronic unemployment and increasing competition for what jobs are available. Rising inflation increasingly pressures male wage earners to earn more to retain what they now have. The viability of the small employer is shrinking, and along with him, job security in any context other than in the giant corporation or big government. The concentration of dollars rests overwhelmingly with giant corporations and government, which alone can afford to guarantee employment during frequent cycles of economic downturn and provide a vital retirement plan, which for more and more American men and their families means survival in their later years. From the perspective of economic peace of mind, one can see how corporations and government can appear to be a warm, nourishing breast. A closer look at one giant corporation, International Business Machines, may be helpful in perceiving how the giant corporation is a modern version of the devouring mother. IBM offers the following benefits to its employees: up to 5 weeks vacation, 12 paid holidays per year, 100% reimbursement of courses approved by IBM taken outside of working hours, tuition up to a total of $2,500 for courses which will help employees or their spouses, if the employee is deceased, prepare for retirement, competitive scholarships of up to $6,000 annually for as many as 4 years, and a total of $24,000 per child for dependents of IBM employees to participate in programs of higher education, paid sick leave, a family hospitalization plan, a family surgical plan, a family major medical plan, including psychotherapy, a whole dental plan, financial assistance for employees with mentally, emotionally, or physically handicapped children or stepchildren up to age 23 to a maximum benefit of $50,000 per child, financial assistance towards expenses incurred in the adoption of children, leave of absence, and financial assistance when an employee enters the armed forces, including an induction payment, monthly leave payments, and up to 24 months of comprehensive medical coverage for children not covered by the U.S. government, group life insurance and survivor's income benefit plan, a total and permanent disability income plan where the disability does not have to be job-related, a retirement plan, and a group life insurance plan after retirement, all of which is 100% paid for by IBM. Other large corporations, as well as the government, offer similar benefits, as well as automatic pay increases, cost of living increases, merit increases, and the like. The male who is stuck at the adolescent level of ego development is in a state of constant struggle against the regressive pull of the matriarchy. As he gets older and begins to pass into his mid-30s, he can almost feel the devouring mother at his heels. In addition, the pressure put on him from the newly emerging feminine hero often serves to intensify his sense of powerlessness and heightens his sense of despair. Government and the giant corporations provide a tantalizing haven for him. Within the bosom of this devouring mother, he feels he can find safety. She will nourish him, protect him, take care of him and his family even unto retirement and death. Promise not to throw him out into the cold where he unconsciously fears. The terrible mother awaits him in the form of the feminine hero. The giant corporation will confer power upon him and make him feel manly by giving him constant reinforcement for his activities within her realm. One of the strong appeals of government and giant corporations is that they provide an artificial sense of rites of passage through promotions, new titles, large and more elaborately decorated offices, fancier company cars, and the like. On the very day an Analyzan who felt creatively stagnant in his work resigned from corporation employment, one of the top 10, in order to become a private consultant in his field, he reported. I trembled as I gave notice to them. I felt as if I was saying, "Mother, I don't need you anymore. I'm leaving home. I have a fear of rejecting my mother and a fear of her rejecting me. At worst, I've told Mother I don't need her anymore, and I feel I will be punished for that." In this context, however, government and giant corporations are anonymous, depersonalized, autonomous entities, more a manifestation of the devouring mother through the collective unconscious than a creation of man. They have no clear identity. No one controls them. They operate on a principle of anonymous collective control and participation mystique. The men who operate and control them are more controlled by them, and often are the unwitting agents for agendas which are less designed by the egos of male managers than by the powerful forces of the collective unconscious. Although many giant corporations, government less so, in fact do carry out many of their promises to their male employees, there is nonetheless a subtle shift from working under the mandate of one's ego to working for the Great Mother. The very benefits that are provided may create a dependency on the part of the individual worker which subtly but inexorably erodes his masculine self-esteem. The stuck hero. In our culture, there is enormous confusion in masculine identity due to the absence of adequate confirmation and validation of the male's hero role. At the same time, the complexity of modern-day society, particularly economic competition, has extended the length of the adolescent period. At the turn of the century and up through the 1920s, the male in our society was expected to live through his adolescence by the end of high school. Now we have the not unusual phenomenon of men reaching the age of 30 and beyond before completing school and venturing forth into the world on their own. This tends to confuse the boundaries between the various stages of masculine ego development, most particularly between the adolescent and adult hero stages. Consequently, initiation rites between these stages lose their focus and meaning, archetypal power is lost, and the archetype of initiation itself is weakened. The fact that one matures physically despite economic necessity and other exigencies has resulted in a psychological crisis in the lives of many men and is most dramatically depicted by stuck middle-aged men still trying to achieve true initiation into their herohood through compulsive competition of all types while the aging process moves from beyond their boyhood dreams. In many instances, our culture tends to produce Willy Lomans and Caseys at the bat instead of legitimate heroes who mature and individuate. Archetypally, masculine maturity becomes the focal point at the adolescent stage of ego development. However, at this stage it lacks sufficient libido to pull away and sever fully from the mother. The emerging masculine ego needs the strong positive support of the father to help make this awesome psychic separation, and ultimately to enter into apprenticeship with the male group. However, a sign of the times is the divorce that shatters the nuclear family, leaving young boys to arrive at their adolescence not only without the presence of a strong father advocate, but often with their mothers as the primary, if not only, advocate on the scene. No matter how positive and supportive a mother she may be to the adolescent boy, the process of masculine initiation is archetypally inverted. It is less important that a man experience himself as having lost crucial battles in his attempt to individuate than that he try. Mythology is full of heroes who have lost many a battle with the dragon of life, e.g. Odysseus, Gilgamesh, and Heracles, among others, but most have won in the end. We live in an era of scientific and technological inflation, and a collective identification with power, struggle, as such, has lost much of its virtue. In the modern age, only the outcome counts, regardless of personal meaning to the individual man. But the struggle itself is the true heroic deed that strengthens man's ego. At the same time, it protects him from an inflating hubris which could destroy him. In the last analysis, if man struggles for his individuation, more likely than not, he will attain it to some significant degree. Rites of passage in the contemporary context. The decline of rites of passage in our culture, and thus the weakening of the archetype of initiation, has resulted primarily from the progressive split and alienation between the matriarchal and patriarchal archetypes over the past 2,000 years. Over-identification with patriarchal consciousness disintegrates reality and experience and leaves out the reality of the unconscious. Patriarchal consciousness exalts the individual above the group and tends to deny to the individual the reality of his or her growth as a function of a group self. It ranks the feeling function as inferior and of lower order of experience, especially to be avoided when dealing with problem solving. It is a consciousness which results in massive secondary personalization of transpersonal contents, particularly of ritual. Thus, patriarchal consciousness has tended to undermine the archetype of initiation, particularly in boys and men, blocking their ego development. There is a profound difference between an ego that is inflated from the collective patriarchal power complex and one that is centered in a meaningful connection to the hero aspect of the individual self. The former leads to a negative power complex and a loss of individual self, and the latter leads to a positive relationship to power, which serves legitimate ego needs and the claiming of masculine selfhood and individuation. The rapid and continuing resurgence of the archetype of the feminine over the past 15 to 20 years has significantly challenged the patriarchal status quo and is bringing about a necessary deflation of a vastly overinflated masculine ego. At the same time, the crisis of deflation has provided men with an opportunity to reconnect with the personal and individuation process, an opportunity to redeem and claim their heroic selves. For such men, there is little focused assistance in our society to help them negotiate these crises. Many simply weather the storm and struggle, often with considerable help from family, friends, and employers, attempting to regain the status they feel they have lost. They see themselves as having gone through a midlife crisis or having experienced a nervous breakdown or some other breakdown which calls for re-establishment of the status quo ante. They do not see their deflation and depression for what it often is, a restorative attempt on the part of the self to compensate for a developmental block which is stunting their masculine individuation. If such men succeed in reclaiming their previous status without undergoing a meaningful emotional and psychic transformation, they will have lost the struggle to redeem their herohood and resume their individuation. They will be the stuck heroes of the modern age. Many will repeat old patterns of depression, nervous breakdown, or divorce into their old age, and as fathers will fail their sons. It would appear that, for the present, the primary means for converting such crises into meaningful growth processes is the analytic therapeutic process. In therapy, the inner psychic rituals and dreams of the erstwhile hero can be brought to conscious light, and guidance can be provided in identifying the rites of passage necessary for formalizing changes in life station. Some examples of such rites of passage might be changing a marital relationship, which is nothing more than a mother-son marriage, leaving a group living arrangement and learning to live by oneself, standing up to a humiliating supervisor, even at the risk of losing one's job, leaving a boring job which offers tenure and material security in order to reclaim one's creativity and ingenuity in other words, or acting on a homosexual obsession, putting a man in touch with a dimension of his masculinity which he might not gain in any other way, or leaving the security of a homosexual relationship for a needed, albeit unsettling, encounter with a woman. This last point is crucial. Contrary to considerable psychological theory, insight and understanding of the meaning of a symbol are not always sufficient to bring about psychic and emotional transformation and to release archetypal libido. To a large extent, the symbol merely points the way. Enactment is necessary to release archetypal libido. For intrapsychic, i.e. symbolic rites of passage to generate transformative potential, they must be enacted. Similarly, compulsive behaviors must be symbolized, i.e. the archetypal meaning interpreted to the individual, so that the behavior can be seen as symbolic of something beyond itself. At this level, interpretation, although necessary, will not always sufficiently affect emotional and or behavioral transformation. A further step, a formalized, enacted ritual may be necessary. For example, a man of small stature compulsively avoided gyms because of paranoid feelings that he would be thought queer, i.e., he had a desire to look at men's crotches in the shower room and to have his own phallus seen. After he was enabled to see that he was afraid his phallic empowerment was not up to that of the other men, or that his masculinity would be ridiculed, he was urged to go back to the gym and to make a point of comparing his penis with other men's. When he actually did so, he concluded that he held his own better than 50% of the time, and that his overall physique was better than that of a vast majority of men. The enactment of this phallic exhibitionism resulted in an empowering experience for him. Interpretation in and of itself was not transformative, but pointed the way to transformative enactment. The resurgence of the archetype of the feminine has refocused a new interest in rituals per se. Fresh attention is being given to fraternities and their initiations, marathon races, Olympics and other athletic games, vision classes, shamanic apprenticeships, and other enactments of other primitive rites and seasonal ceremonies. The popularity of certain relevant organizations such as Outward Bound, the National Outdoor Leadership School, or the advanced Boy Scouts testify to the resurgence of interest in the boy-to-manhood passage. Men's consciousness groups also show promise. None of these movements appear to be strong enough to turn the tide. Rather, they attest to a process which has begun rumbling around in the collective unconscious of our culture and in the individual unconscious of many men, a psychic need for rites of passage and a true initiation into manhood. The revival of the archetype of the feminine would seem to hold most promise for the younger generations of men. I am beginning to see the emergence of young men who are much more in touch with their feeling side, viewing this aspect of themselves as more legitimate and important in their lives than did their forebears. These men, by and large, seem to be split between their feeling and rational sides and are more aware, intuitively, if not consciously, of their need for relationships based as much on the Eros principle as on the Logos. They appear to have greater need to express their love for each other. Sometimes the Eros connection between males is mistaken for homosexual leanings, but what we are witnessing is instead a deeper masculine connection between men, a regeneration of a manifest and much needed male fraternity. Moreover, these younger men appear to be less afraid of women and the feminine. Their deeper understanding of their own femininity makes possible more realistic and viable relationships with women. As they relate to girls and women as individuals and less as projections of their mothers, they develop non-maternal relationships to the feminine and are more open to outer support as well as inner counsel from the Athena helper. Given the future prominence of the archetype of the feminine, I would predict a revival of interest in the male group, the emergence of new organizations and mechanisms for enactment of rites of passage appropriate to life stage, a greater respect by males for the feminine, the appearance of concepts of masculine power which value feelings and relatedness rather than excluding them, and the increased manifestation of eros in relationships between men. Significant numbers of men graduating from colleges and universities will be less focused on materialistic aspects of their careers and more interested in the qualitative aspect of their lives, particularly in their intimate interpersonal relationships. In short, there will be some redressing of the imbalance. At the same time, negative, regressive, patriarchal, and matriarchal forces will continue to persist, particularly in large group corporations, government agencies, unions, trade associations, educational institutions, and political groups, and will be evident in technological advances that mechanize and depersonalize masculine power. These forces will continue to exert considerable pressure on individual men, fostering the supremacy of the group self over the individual self and undermining masculine self-esteem to the overall detriment of the masculine ego. Another probably temporary regressive influence is women who are angry at men for not being macho enough in their eyes. In the interim, for those of us who are aware of the problem and are willing to invest some energy in the process, there are significant remedial measures that can be undertaken. Organizations and groups exist which offer initiatory type experiences for men of all ages. Some of these experiences are patterned after American Indian vision quests or dream quests. Others are based on mythological underworld journeys or pilgrimages. The vision quest holds considerable psychological potential, for American Indian heritage is very much a part of our collective unconscious. Mahdi has demonstrated the value and feasibility of a group initiatory experience patterned on the Plains Indians' vision quest for young males and females at the high school and college levels. The reinstitution of dramatic initiatory experiences, particularly during latter part of adolescence, can do much to reconstitute the natural psychic boundaries which delineate the various stages of masculine ego development. Although rites of passage have lost much of their archetypal value in modern culture, it would not be too difficult, given a focused effort, to reanimate them with a measure of archetypal libido. A conscious father can assist his son through various stages of growth by applying the archetypal power of rite and ceremony to these growth events. Any activity can be lifted from the ordinary and given special ritual attention. The ritualizing process can be employed with virtually any activity valued by the boy, such as his first handling and firing of a gun, the first time he kills another creature for its meat, the first time he shaves, the first time he drinks, the first time he stands up to the men's urinal, the first time he gets a bike, a girlfriend, a varsity letter, or the keys to the family car. In the end, what is called for is considerable consciousness raising regarding the crucial importance of rites of passage and initiation for men in our culture. Hopefully, in time, groups offering initiatory experiential education will become more deeply involved in public education, as well as provide their services to all those who have a conscious need for them. Public education itself must face this issue and open its curriculum to education involving rites of passage. Physical education departments already carry out a quasi-role, albeit a not very conscious one, insofar as competitive athletics are concerned. It would seem appropriate and feasible for organized initiatory experiences to be conducted through physical education programs at the junior and senior levels of high school for all students, not just those who helped the school win the trophy in competitive sports. The problem of uninitiated men in our culture carries import that reaches beyond the development of the individual man and affects the well-being of our culture as a whole. A healthy transition from a culture that has been dominated by the patriarchy to one which reflects a new integration of feminine with masculine values is dependent on the freeing of the masculine psyche from its adolescent-bound state. In this mission, women have no less stake than men, for the lesson to be learned in the New Age is that the individuation of the one is dependent on the individuation of the other.